What's up guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you how you can make your very own and very first VFX in Roblox Studio. VFX is commonly referred to as visual effects, however it's shortened to VFX just for simpler terms and simply to shorten the word down, sort of like sound effects and effects and other stuff like that. I'm not going to show you how to make some crazy off the wall VFX because I'm going to show you the basics of how to make VFX, and that way you can take what you've learned from this tutorial and apply it and use practice to make your own VFXs going forwards. So what we're going to start off with is we need to go ahead and create two different things before we get into scripting. The first thing we're going to make is just a part right here. The part is going to be the hitbox for our player. So let's go ahead and go into the properties right here and let's change the size to 4,4,4. And this will make us get a very perfect cube right here. That I'm going to change the brick color to very red or really red to help us to see it a little bit easier. And inside the properties we can go down here and turn on anchored and turn off can collide. We can just simply rename this to hitbox just like that. And now we can get on to making our second thing, and this is going to be the projectile that you want to fire. This can be a fireball if you want to make it that. It can be a bullet, it can be really anything, but it needs to be a projectile. So I'm simply just going to add in a sphere right here. I'm going to change it to a light blue color, and I'm going to change the material to a neon. This one a little bit more blue, something like this, and that is my projectile. If you would like to, you can add in emitters, decals, or textures to it if you want to, but I'm just going to have a very simple sphere to start off with. You can also use mesh parts or unions if you're willing to do that as well. After that, I'm just going to rename this to projectile. We have our two items. We can get into scripting. Starter player, we can open that up and go into starter character scripts, and we're going to add in a local script into starter character scripts. I'm just going to name this to client ability, that, and then inside of server script service, let's add in a script, just name this to server. Obviously we have a server script and a client script, but we need a way to communicate in between the scripts. And in order to do that, we're going to be using a remote event that we're going to stick inside of a folder inside of replicated storage. I'm going to rename the folder I just added to remotes, and inside of that folder I'm going to add in a remote event. Name this remote event to ability and get scripting. So let's go into our client ability script right here, and we're going to start off with some services. I'm just going to reference that up at the top with a comment, and we're going to start off with replicated storage. And this is going to be equal to game : get service, capital G here, get service, and then we put quotation marks inside of here, and this is going to be replicated storage. Let's go ahead and get our variables. I'm just going to reference this here so that our code looks a little easier to read. I'm going to get our remote event, which will be equal to replicated storage.remotes.ability. And we can copy these lines of code and put them into our server script right here, because we're going to be using both of these services for our server script as well. Now inside of our client ability script, once again, we're also going to add in local user input service underneath replicated service. And it's going to be equal to game get service user input service. No, replicated storage is what we call a built-in service. It's located in the Explorer on the right, as you can see, replicated storage, whereas user input service is what we call service or a non-built-in service because it's not inside the Explorer. We reference it using a script, and what user input service does is it allows us to detect user input on the player, and we can use any sort of function or event with that. Here we're also going to get the player, our remote event variable. We're going to get our local player, which will be equal to game.players.localPlayer. We can get into our functions here. We're going to say our user input service dot input began, and we're going to connect a function to this. This is going to be two more parentheses on the end here, and we're going to take our input object as the first parameter, and then we're going to take our game processed Take our game processed event. Game processed event it's basically whether or not the player is typing or doing anything else with their keyboard that isn't inside of the game itself. To check if that game processed event, then we're going to return N, so it'll stop right there, because we don't want this to player is typing or doing anything else of that sort. Then we check if our input object.keycode, which is the key that the player pressed, equals to enum.keycode. And this is where you get to choose your own keycode that you want the ability to fire off of. Common ones I've seen are Q and S and even F. I'm personally going to be using F. I think that's the most comfortable for me, so I'm going to be using F, but you can choose any other key on the keyboard. Side up here, we're just going to print your .name fired to server. We can actually tell who is firing to the server, and we're going to take our remote event, we're going to say colon, fire server parentheses, and then this is going to take our player. Actually, we don't need our player, but we are going to need the player's mouse. We're going to say local mouse will be equal to player colon get mouse parentheses, just like that. Down here inside of our remote event, we're going to say mouse.hit.position as the parameter. Just go ahead and put this print statement below the remote event, just so we make sure that after we have actually fired to the server. Then let's go into our server script. Actually, let me explain this one to you guys. So whenever an input begins, whether that be someone taps on their screen on a phone, whether that be a player presses F on their keyboard, any other input that the player can use, we're going to connect a function to it. And then we check if the player is typing while they press that certain key, then we're just going to return N because we don't want this to fire. Otherwise, if their input to the specific key code that you chose, we're going to fire to the server just like this. And then we're also going to put a comma after the mouse hit position, and we are going to call our ability. It's a value that we can use to stress test our server to make sure that we can exploit proof it even more. So let's go into our server script here, and what we're going to do here, inside of our services right here that we have, we're just going to say local tween service will be equal to game colon get service parentheses quotation marks, and this is going to be tween service. Tween service is the service that we use to tween parts and instances. Tweening, we're really just animating a part's properties. There are all sorts of properties that we can change on the part through tween service, whether that be the color, the transparency, the position, anything like that, and that's why we use tween service, because we're going to be altering the instance's frame and position smoothly using tween service. That we're going to get our debounce table. Local debounce will be equal to an empty table for now, and then we're going to say local hitbox be equal to script dot, we need to put our hitbox and our projectile inside of workspace, and we need to drag these all the way over to our server ability script, and these will just reside inside of there for now. So when we say hitbox equals to script dot hitbox, we can now reference our hitbox, which is inside of our script. And we're going to do the same thing for our projectile here. A local projectile equals to script.projectile. I'm going to create the same functions comment as before, and we're going to say remote event.onServer event. So when the player will fire to the server whenever they press F, we're just to connect to that event. And it's going to take our player that actually fired the event. We're going to take our mouse position. We're going to take our value, which was whatever we passed at the end there. And we're just going to, actually cut all these out because I made a mistake. We need to connect a function first off, and then we can put all these in here. That way we won't get an error. I forgot to put the function in there, sorry about that. The player is once again the player who fired the event. The mouse position is the player's mouse position at the time that they fired it, and then the value is whatever we passed through here, which is ability. First thing we're going to check is if value equals to ability. Then Do this is because if an exploiter were to join your game and they are able to fire a remote event, we just want to make sure that we have a certain value inside of the remote event. Make sure that the value has to be this, otherwise the script will not run. So we want to make sure this is as exploit proof as possible. After we've passed that test to make sure that our script is completely exploit proof, we want to check if the player has been going under a debounce or not. So we're going to check if table.find, and we're going to check our debounce table, player.name does not equal to nil, then print debounce because the player is under a debounce at the moment. So if we do not find the player's name inside of that table, then what we're going to go ahead and do, we're going to print server received signal. I'll make sure we have good communication between our client and our server script here. And I'm going to insert the player's name into our debounce table. The table.insert is going to be debounce, comma, player.name. And by doing this, we just basically make sure that we're checking if the player's name is inside of the debounce table or not. If it is, then we're going to print debounce and we're not going to do anything else. Otherwise, if the player's name is not found inside the table, then we're going to insert it into the table so that way the player can't run the script again immediately. I'm going to say task.wait 5 seconds, or you can make this debounce as long as you want. I'm actually going to do 2 seconds. And then we set a table.remove. That's going to be our debounce table. But now we need to do table.find because we need to find where the player is at inside of our debounce table. And this will take player.name after our debounce here. Insert the player's name to the table. After 2 seconds, we will remove it from the table, which means that they can run the script again. We're adding the debounce on the server side is simply because it is much more reliable and a lot easier. A lot more reliable and a lot harder, in fact it's even impossible for an exploiter to get through. Go ahead and we say local hitbox clone will be equal to hitbox clone, just like that. Hitbox clone.parent will be equal to game.workspace. For that, we just want to say hitbox clone.cframe will be equal to player.character find first child humanoid root part .cframe. Set our hitbox at the player's C-frame, which is their humanoid root part C-frame. And we also want to clone our projectile. So we're going to say local projectile clone will be equal to projectile clone. Pretty much copy all the answers from up here. So we're going to say projectile clone dot C-frame will be equal to the exact same thing. A projectile clone dot parent will be equal to game dot workspace. What we're doing here is we're getting a clone of our hitbox, because if we were just to use the hitbox inside of our script, then we would only be able to use the script or this ability just once, because the hitbox would be all gone because we forgot to clone it. So that's why we decide to clone it here, so that we can run it over multiple times with breaking. Then we just set a few of the properties here, like the C-frame to the player's C-frame and the parent to the workspace, so that way we can see it. Same thing for the projectile here. We're going to be using our tween, which will be equal to tween service :create. And this is going to be our hitbox clone, comma, tweeninfo.new. This will take roughly 1 second. You can change that to however many seconds you want to. I recommend 1 though, that we have a nice speedy projectile. Comma right there, and we say position will be equal to mouse position, just like that. That will basically redirect our clone's position to our mouse position that we sent through the remote event a little bit earlier. And we can copy this whole variable right here and just paste it a line beneath, except we're going to replace hitbox clone inside of here with our projectile clone, and then our tween we're going to rename to projectile tween, just like that. And then we simply say tween :play and then projectile tween play, just like that. Well, this is great and all. Let's go ahead and test this out and see how it will work. In here is that when the player presses F, we're going to send a projectile out of our character and it's going to move towards our mouse position. You can see it's working perfectly. We can't spam it because of the debounce, which is also great, but you'll notice a few things are happening here. We're able to actually move around the objects and projectiles that we're shooting, but we need to go ahead and edit a few of the properties here because one, they aren't disappearing, and two, they kind of stick out of the ground. So let's click on the stop button. I believe it's the projectile we forgot to mess around with. So down inside the properties, you want to turn on anchored and turn off can collide. Let's go into our server ability script once again, and we're going to say game get service debris, and we're going to say colon add item. This is going to be our hitbox clone, comma 5 seconds for the lifetime inside of that. And what this is doing, if we copy it again for the projectile clone, is that after 5 seconds, I'm going to destroy this item that we have inside of here. What I do is we just want to set this to 2 actually, because that's the same time as our debounce right here, or our cooldown in between debounces. And this is going to destroy our item after 2 seconds basically. But we need to make sure that we're actually dealing damage to the player. So we want to say hitbox clone.touched. We're going to connect a function to that. Now this function is going to take the hit parameter. Check if hit.parent colon find first child humanoid, then check local hit player will be equal to game.players colon get player from character. That's going to be hit.parent. So now we have our hit player variable and our player variable, which is perfect because we're going to be using this to make sure that the player cannot hit himself. If hitPlayer.name does not equal to player.name, then we can go ahead with the script. Right, if hitPlayer.character.humanoid colon find first child parentheses quotation dot name dot dot quotation marks debounce, just like that. So if we find with the name of the player and then with a debounce at the end of it, and to print player is under a debounce. So if we do not find that debounce object inside of the player's humanoid, what we're going to do is we're going to check hit player dot character dot humanoid colon take image parentheses, and this is going to be however much damage you want the player to take. I'm personally going to do something like 30 damage because we want to make sure the player gets a decent dose of damage. Change that to whatever you want to do, whether that be 50 or 10, it really depends on you. We're going to create that debounce that we were talking about up here. So we're going to say local debounce will be equal to .new, and in fact we need to give this a different name because right now it matches the name of our debounce table up here, which doesn't really matter because those are case sensitive, but I'd prefer it not to be the same name pretty much. So we're going to name this to debounce boolean because we're going to make an instance.new bool value. Change debounce boolean dot parent, and this will be equal to hit player dot character dot humanoid. Change debounce boolean dot name will equal to player dot name dot dot debounce. Say game colon get service, and this is going to be debris service or just debris colon add item debounce boolean comma 1. I realized once again that our tween is 1 second long, but our hitbox clone is getting deleted in 2 seconds. So we need to change this to 1 on both items right here. That way we'll make sure that they get destroyed as soon as their tween is finished. This is our script being done. What happens here is that whenever our hitbox clone gets touched, the one that we copied up here, then we're going to check if the hit.parent find first child humanoid. What this does is hit is often a base part that a player is made out of. And so if the base part's parent finds a humanoid, we can continue with our script because the parent of a base part of a player would be the player's character. And the player's character holds their humanoid. And so we can check if a player is actually being the part, check if the part that is hitting the player is actually hitting a player or not by just using this line right here. Then if it is, we check if there is a player that same humanoid, and we make sure that player is not the same as the player that actually wanted to shoot the fireball. After that, we check if the hit player cannot be hit again because they're debounced. We're going to print players under a debounce, but if they are not under that debounce, we're going to take damage, and then we're going to create the debounce for them, where we delete the debounce afterwards so that we can hit them again. That we just make sure we delete everything right on time, and these will not get delayed simply because we are waiting for this to get touched, and the script will still run regardless of whether or not the hitbox actually gets touched or not. Let's go ahead and close off of our scripts here and click on play. Press F right now. You can see that we have a hitbox that'll float around and go straight towards wherever my mouse is, and that is really cool. But let's go ahead and fix that up, because we don't want to see the hitbox, we only want to see the projectile. So you can change the transparency of the hitbox to 1, and that'll make it so we can no longer see the hitbox. Run a test of 2 people to make sure that the damage is working. Inside of a team test at the moment, I've got 2 of me. I'm gonna try firing this projectile at my fellow me over here. I'm going to press F, and as you can see, the player actually took damage. You can tell right here that since they're taking damage, if I were to show you the server side, you can see that the player over here has a decent amount of low health. So we are dealing damage to the player. And what's so great about this is that this player can turn around and also shoot at this player. So overall, it's a pretty cool system. By following along with this tutorial, you guys have learned how to receive and detect input. Following along with this tutorial, you guys have learned how to detect input on the player, how to fire and receive remote events, a little bit about tween service, and you've learned a little bit about how to make your own VFX. Most of it is tweening, particles, beams, and trails, which are pretty complicated things. And if you want me to make a more complicated, advanced tutorial on those items, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment down below. I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.